The chandeliers were too bright. They made everything feel exposed. The gold tablecloths, the polished shoes, the stiff smiles. Plates clinked, cutlery scraped. Someone's perfume hung heavy in the air. My sister stood near the back of the hall in her simple navy dress, shoulders straight, hands folded calmly in front of her. Then my cousin leaned into the microphone and laughed. "My sister's just a security guard. Who would want her?" The room burst into laughter, not loud at first, just enough. My mother added from her seat, "She's the disgrace of this family." I didn't move. Neither did my sister. The groom, a major in uniform, stood slowly. He looked at her, then at my mother. "Actually, she's—" My mother froze, and my sister collapsed. Have you ever felt a room change in one breath? People assume a security guard is someone who stands near a gate and watches a screen. They don't picture a woman who has learned to read a crowd the way others read a book. My sister Sana learned that early. She's the kind of person who notices the details. A hand that lingers too long near a purse. A raised voice before a fight. The way someone walks when they're not supposed to be somewhere. She doesn't talk much about it. She just does her job, and she does it well. But in our family, jobs aren't measured by effort. They're measured by status. My mother loves status the way some people love jewelry. She wears it, shows it, uses it to cut people down quietly. When Sana became a security guard, my mother acted like she had brought home a stain. When she had potential, she would say to relatives. But she didn't listen. Listen to what? To marry rich? To pick a career that looks good in photos? To be someone our mother could brag about? Sana never argued. She just kept waking up early, ironing her uniform carefully and leaving the house with steady steps. And I watched it happen. I watched her get treated like the family's backup plan. At family dinners, her seat was always at the edge of the table. When guests asked what she did, my mother would answer for her. "She's in security," she'd say, as if it were an apology. Then she'd quickly mention our cousin who worked in a bank, or an aunt's son who moved abroad. The conversation would slide away from Sana like she wasn't worth the pause. Subtle betrayals don't always look like shouting, and sometimes they look like being skipped over. Even when Sana paid bills, helped with groceries, fixed things around the house, my mother still spoke about her like she was a burden. "Who will marry her?" my mother would ask, loud enough for Sana to hear from the hallway. "What man wants a wife who stands outside buildings like a guard? Do you know what that does to someone over time? Not the insult itself, but the repetition of it. The way it tries to rewrite a person's worth. The engagement dinner was supposed to be a turning point. Not for Sana and the groom, for my mother, because she was determined to show everyone she still controlled the narrative. The groom, Major Ferris Khan, was a respected officer. Well-mannered, calm, the kind of man who listens before he speaks. His family was polite. His colleagues were seated at a separate table, uniforms sharp, posture straight. This was not our family's usual crowd, and my mother was nervous. I could tell by how often she adjusted her dupatta and checked her lipstick. She wanted to impress them, which is why she couldn't tolerate Sana standing there quietly, existing without shame. Before dinner began, my mother pulled me aside near the hallway. "Don't let her embarrass us," she whispered. "Embarrass you how?" I asked. "She looks too plain," my mother said, eyes flicking toward Sana. "And don't let her talk too much. People will ask questions." Questions. My mother always feared questions, because questions reveal things she can't control. I looked at Sana across the room. She was helping an elderly aunt find a seat, careful and respectful, like she always was. And I realized something that made my stomach turn. My mother wasn't worried Sana would embarrass us. She was worried Sana would be seen. The laughter that followed my cousin's insult wasn't the beginning. It was the result of years of permission being given. And when the major stood up and my sister collapsed, I knew whatever he was about to say had already been building toward this moment. It didn't start at the engagement dinner. The tension had been there for weeks. When Major Ferris first came to our house with his parents, my mother smiled too widely. She served tea in the good cups. She spoke softly, polite, controlled. But the moment they left, her expression changed. "He's too accomplished for her," she said flatly. I was standing in the kitchen, drying plates. "He chose her," I replied. My mother gave me that look. The one that says you don't understand how the world works. Men like that don't marry security guards, she said. They marry women who elevate them. Elevate, as if Sana's job weighed him down. The early signs were small, but sharp. When Ferris called, my mother would answer before Sana could reach the phone. She's busy, she'd say, even when Sana was sitting right there. At family gatherings, my mother would introduce him proudly as Major Ferris, emphasizing the title. Then she'd gesture vaguely toward Sana without saying her name. Have you ever noticed how someone can erase you without raising their voice? Sana noticed. Of course she did. But she never confronted her. Instead, she adjusted. She stopped mentioning work at the dinner table. She stopped correcting people when they assumed she was just filling in until marriage. She smiled more carefully, spoke less. One afternoon, I found her ironing her uniform in her small bedroom. The room smelled faintly of starch and detergent. Sunlight cut across the floor in thin lines. She pressed each sleeve slowly, deliberately. You don't have to hide it, I said gently. She didn't look up. I'm not hiding, she replied. But the pause afterward said something else. My mother had started making comments in front of Ferris, too. You'll have to be patient with her, she told him once. She's not used to your kind of circles. His kind. I watched his jaw tighten slightly, but he didn't argue. Not yet. Ferris was respectful to a fault. He addressed my mother as Auntie. He stood when elders entered the room, and he never corrected her publicly. But there were moments. Once when my mother referred to Sana's job as temporary, he said calmly, I respect what she does. My mother laughed. Of course. It's admirable. But long-term? That phrase again. Long-term. As if Sana's worth had an expiration date. The night of the engagement dinner, I noticed something different about Ferris. He was quieter than usual, observing, watching the way my mother interacted with Sana, watching the subtle jokes, the glances, the way my cousin felt comfortable enough to grab the microphone and turn humiliation into entertainment. Because that kind of boldness doesn't appear from nowhere. It grows in soil that has been watered for years, and when my cousin sneered, who would want her? The room laughed because they believed the narrative was safe. They thought no one would challenge it. But when Ferris stood up, something shifted. He didn't rush. He didn't look angry. He looked certain. And certainty is more dangerous than outrage. Then Sana's body swayed slightly. Her fingers loosened at her sides. And before anyone could react, she hit the floor. The sound of her falling was soft. But the silence that followed was not. For a second, no one moved. It was as if the room needed permission to react. Then chairs scraped. Someone gasped. A glass tipped over and rolled across the table, wobbling before settling near the edge. I was already kneeling beside her. Sana, I said softly, touching her shoulder. Her skin felt cool, not alarming, just drained. The Major was beside us within seconds. Calm, focused. He loosened the edge of her scarf slightly and checked her pulse the way someone trained would. She's breathing, he said evenly. Give her space. His voice cut through the panic like a steady line. My mother stood frozen near her chair, one hand still wrapped around her napkin. Her face had lost color. She's being dramatic, my cousin muttered weakly. I looked up sharply. Dramatic. Is that what we call a body that has absorbed too much humiliation? Sana had always been strong enough to ignore comments, strong enough to work night shifts, strong enough to carry herself quietly. But strength has limits. The hall felt smaller now. The laughter from earlier had evaporated, replaced by the soft hum of anxiety. When one of Ferris's colleagues stepped forward to help clear space, another brought water. The Major spoke gently to Sana as her eyelids fluttered. You're okay, he said. Take your time. He didn't sound embarrassed. He sounded protective. And that's when I noticed something. He wasn't surprised. He had seen the pattern too. Have you ever watched someone realize the truth about your family before you're ready to admit it yourself? Sana's eyes opened slowly. She looked confused at first, then aware. The ceiling lights reflected in her pupils. She tried to sit up, but Ferris placed a steady hand near her shoulder. Easy, he said quietly. My mother finally stepped forward. What happened? She asked, voice trembling slightly. No one answered her immediately, because we all knew. It wasn't the joke alone. It wasn't the microphone, and it was the weight of years packed into one public moment. The major helped Sana into a chair. She avoided looking at our mother. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers slightly curled. "I'm fine," she said softly. But she wasn't. And neither was the room. The engagement dinner had shifted from celebration to revelation. The narrative my mother had carefully maintained, that Sana was small, temporary, unworthy, was cracking. And everyone had witnessed it. Then the major stood again. He adjusted his uniform calmly. And this time, when he looked at my mother, there was no hesitation. The room stayed quiet as he stood. Not the polite quiet from before. This was different, heavy, expectant. Major Ferris didn't raise his voice. He didn't glare. He simply adjusted the cuff of his uniform and looked directly at my mother. With respect," he began calmly, "Sana is the strongest person in this room." No one laughed this time. He turned slightly so everyone could see him. "When I was posted at the logistics facility last year, there was a security breach. It was minor, but it could have escalated." A few of his colleagues exchanged glances. "She was on duty that night," he continued. "She noticed something that others ignored. She followed protocol. She reported it immediately." My mother's fingers tightened around the back of her chair. "She prevented a situation that would have put dozens of people at risk." The air felt thinner. I looked at Sana. Her eyes were fixed on the floor. "She doesn't talk about it," Ferris said quietly. "She doesn't need applause, but I do." He faced my mother again. "You call her a disgrace?" he said evenly. I call her disciplined, reliable, brave." The words didn't sound dramatic. They sounded factual. Have you ever witnessed someone defend you in a way that makes you realize how much you've been undervalued? My cousin shifted uncomfortably near the microphone stand. Ferris continued, "I didn't choose her despite her job. I chose her because of it." Silence. My mother opened her mouth slightly but didn't speak. The chandeliers hummed faintly above us. The smell of food had turned stale in the still air. "For your information," he added calmly, "she was recommended for a supervisory role next quarter." That was news to me, and judging by the slight widening of Sana's eyes, it was news to her too. My stepfather finally spoke. "No one was attacking her. It was just a joke." Ferris didn't argue. He simply asked, Would you make that joke about my rank?" The question settled slowly. No one answered, because the answer was obvious. Status had been the shield, and now that shield had cracked. Sana shifted in her chair, trying to stand on her own. I helped her gently. Her balance was steady now. "I don't need defending," she said softly. Ferris looked at her, not over her. "I know," he replied, "but respect should not be optional." My mother's face had lost its composure completely. The confident hostess had disappeared. In her place was someone uncertain, exposed. The power in the room had changed, not through shouting, through clarity. And for the first time, I realized something uncomfortable. We had all tolerated this pattern for too long. Even me. The applause didn't come. There was no cinematic moment where the room burst into admiration. There was only a thick, uncomfortable stillness. My mother's face shifted between defensiveness and embarrassment. She smoothed the edge of her dupatta like she was trying to regain control of the room. "You're exaggerating," she said finally. "We were teasing." Teasing. Ferris didn't respond immediately. He walked to the table, picked up the microphone my cousin had abandoned, and set it down gently. Then he spoke without it. "I don't find humiliation funny," he said. The words weren't loud, but they reached everyone. My stepfather stood straighter, trying to recover authority. "You're taking this too seriously. Families joke." I felt something settle inside me. Families also protect. I stepped forward for the first time. "Not like that," I said quietly. My voice surprised me. It wasn't shaking. For years, I stayed silent at dinners like this. I watched Sana absorb comments. I told myself it wasn't my place, that confronting my mother would only make things worse. But worse had already happened. Have you ever realized that silence becomes participation after a while? My cousin tried to laugh again. "Oh, come on, you're all being dramatic." Ferris turned to him calmly. "Would you introduce your sister like that in front of strangers?" The cousin didn't answer, because now there were strangers in the room, colleagues, officers, people who measured respect differently. My mother looked around as if searching for an ally. None came. The chandeliers above us seemed brighter than before, exposing every expression. I raised her, my mother said suddenly, voice tightening. I know her limits. That sentence did something to me. Limits. As if my sister was a boundary, not a person. Ferris stepped closer to Sana, not possessive, just present. She doesn't have limits, he said evenly. She has standards. The distinction was subtle, but powerful. Sana's shoulders straightened slightly. My stepfather exhaled sharply. If this is how it's going to be, maybe this engagement was rushed. There it was. The boundary crossing. Threat, control. A suggestion that respect would cost her the relationship. The room shifted again. I looked at Sana. For a second, fear flickered across her face. Not fear of losing him. Fear of proving my mother right. What if she walked away and they said, "See, we told you. That's the trap of long-term belittling. You start doubting your own worth." Ferris didn't hesitate. If this engagement ends because I won't tolerate disrespect," he said calmly, "then it was never secure to begin with." The words landed like a line drawn in sand. No anger, no drama, just clarity. And that clarity exposed something no one could ignore anymore. No one said anything after that. The threat hung in the air, but it had lost its power. My mother looked smaller somehow, not physically, just uncertain. The narrative she had built about control, status, and superiority had started to slip through her fingers. Sana took a slow breath, then another. "I need air," she said quietly. Ferris nodded and stepped aside, not leading her, not pulling her, just giving her space to move. I followed her out into the corridor. The hallway lights were softer than the chandeliers inside. The air felt cooler, less heavy. I could still hear the low murmur of voices from the hall, but it sounded distant now. Sana leaned against the wall and closed her eyes. "I'm fine," she said again, but this time it wasn't to convince anyone else. It was to convince herself. "You didn't deserve that," I told her. She gave a small, tired smile. "I'm used to it." That sentence hurt more than the fall. Used to it. How many years had she trained herself to shrink so others could feel taller? Ferris stepped into the corridor a moment later, careful not to crowd her. "I'm sorry you had to hear that," he said softly. She opened her eyes and looked at him properly. "You shouldn't apologize," she replied. "I'm not," he said. "I'm acknowledging." There was something steady in the way he stood beside her. Not heroic, not dramatic, just aligned. Inside the hall, and I could hear my mother trying to smooth things over, laughter forced, plates being rearranged, the performance continuing. But the room wasn't the same anymore, and neither were we. Have you ever felt the exact moment you stopped chasing approval? Sana straightened her dress slowly. Her breathing had steadied. "I'm not embarrassed," she said, almost to herself. "Good," Ferris replied, "because you shouldn't be." The engagement dinner would continue. The food would be served. Photos would be taken. But the illusion had broken. When we walked back inside, Sana didn't lower her gaze. She didn't rush to the edge of the room. She took her seat at the center table. Not to prove anything, just because she belonged there. And for the first time, my mother didn't correct her. The dinner resumed, but the laughter never fully returned. And conversation stayed measured, polite, careful. My mother avoided eye contact with Sana for the rest of the evening. She busied herself with serving dishes that no one was really hungry for anymore. Control had slipped, and everyone felt it. When the guests began leaving, Ferris's colleagues shook Sana's hand respectfully. One of them even said, "We've heard about your work." My mother heard that too. She didn't comment. Later, when only close family remained, she finally spoke. "I didn't mean to insult you," she said, voice quieter than I had ever heard it. Sana didn't rush to reassure her. "I know," she replied calmly, "but you did." The difference between those two sentences was everything. For years, my mother framed her comments as jokes, as concern, as guidance. Now they had been named. My stepfather cleared his throat. "Ma, we just want the best for you." Sana met his eyes steadily. Then respect what I've built, she said. No raised voice, no tears, just a boundary. Have you ever watched someone reclaim their worth without attacking anyone? The room felt lighter after that, not because the past disappeared, but because it was acknowledged. On the drive home, I looked at my sister in the passenger seat. The streetlights passed over her face in soft flashes. You okay? I asked. She nodded. I think, she said slowly, I stopped waiting for her approval tonight. That was the real shift. Not the major speech, not the collapse. The shift was internal. In the weeks that followed, my mother's tone changed. Not overnight, not perfectly, but noticeably. She introduced Sana by name. She stopped apologizing for her job in conversations. Mom, people adjust when the old narrative stops working. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been reduced to a title that didn't capture your strength, take a moment to like and share your thoughts below. Sometimes the most powerful change isn't dramatic. It's steady. That night wasn't the end of tension, but it was the beginning of dignity. And dignity, once claimed, doesn't collapse easily. What would you have done in that room? Comment below.